Welcome back, everybody. What if Trump is right about birthright citizenship? So birthright citizenship right now means that under our laws, if anyone is here, even if they are here illegally, if they have a child, boom, they're a citizen just because they had their baby here, even if they are here illegally. But is that right? We basically have one Supreme Court case that was really on point. And what if it's been misinterpreted too broadly this whole time? I feel like President Trump actually has some good arguments that it's been interpreted too broadly. So that's what we're going to be digging into. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video where we dig into the Supreme Court case that everybody's relying on. We're going to look at a few other Supreme Court cases and some of the legislative history to see what they really meant. And we'll start a little bit by talking about President Trump's executive order. But since the order, a lot of people have been saying, President Trump is wrong. That's just crazy. But you know what? Do you know how many times people have said President Trump was wrong and then later he turns out to be right? That's happened a lot. If I had $1 for every time President Trump, people said he was wrong and he ended up being right, I could build the wall myself, okay? So let's not jump to conclusions that he's wrong in what he's thinking. So let's go ahead and walk through this. And I think by the end, hopefully I will convince you that I think we have some reasonable arguments that he could be right on this. So President Trump just recently signed an executive order challenging birthright citizenship by limiting it to children born to citizens or to lawful permanent residents. Green card holders. And just a few days ago, a judge blocked this order. I think this was a judge up in Seattle. The judge said that it was blatantly an unconstitutional executive order that aims to end birthright citizenship. Now, just keep in mind, these are the same judges that didn't find any constitutional problems with lockdowns or vaccine mandates or censoring free speech, but when President Trump does something, suddenly they find a copy of the Constitution and they want to look it up. But so that's what a district court judge said. And so it's on hold right now. This will certainly go up to an appeals court and they will affirm it. And hopefully it will go to the Supreme Court. And I'll talk about them a little bit later. But that's where I'm hoping that maybe we can get a more narrow interpretation of what the law is. But this is what happened up in Seattle. From the judge who, he seemed like he had a serious case of Trump derangement syndrome, just because a judge saying it was blatantly unconstitutional. And I think he also said something about, I can't believe any lawyer on this would think that there was any chance that this could be constitutional. I don't know. The language that he was using, I just thought, oh, this guy's got TDS big time. I know he was a Reagan-appointed judge in Seattle, but if he would have been looking at, I don't know how many orders Biden tried to pull that were all unconstitutional, would he have been using language like that? Or I doubt it. I doubt it. So anyway, but I think they probably expected this to happen because they are needing this to go to the Supreme Court so that we can get a decision from the Supreme Court. I don't know if you saw this article, but this just came out today. I'm actually filming this on the 25th. This is from Fox News. Up to 250,000 children were born to illegal migrants in 2023. Okay. And that is about 7% of the total births in the United States. 7% of all the births in the United States were from people that were here illegally. And because of this current birthright citizenship, guess what? All of 250,000 new babies. Hey, congrats. You're now a citizen of the United States. Illegal immigration is wrong, but don't worry. We'll reward you by giving automatic citizenship to your baby. Basically a participation trophy for border jumping. And another consequence that comes from our overly broad interpretation of birthright citizenship is this birth tourism. Have you heard of this before? It's where foreign nationals come to the United States to give birth so that their baby is an American citizen and then they leave again, right? So, and this is despite the parents having no permanent ties with the United States. And this is one example of the exploitation of an overly broad birthright citizenship law, the one that we have right now. I know, it might be hard to screen for that, for the TSA, right? If people are coming into the country, if they just said, ma'am, are you trying to give birth here or are you just big boned? So here's what we need to look at when we're looking at birthright citizenship, okay? We need to look at what was the original meaning under the 14th Amendment. It really matters what they were really trying to accomplish with the language, not necessarily what some Harvard law professor today is telling you that they meant, because they're idiots. We need to actually try to figure out what the drafters were really going for. Does the 14th Amendment mandate universal birthright citizenship? We need to try to figure that out from their intention. What did the drafters mean by subject to the jurisdiction thereof? That is a key clause in the 14th Amendment, which is where this birthright citizenship comes from. And one of the phrases in that is very critical for the interpretation of what was actually meant. You can call me old-fashioned, but I think that we should probably try to find out what the original drafter was trying to accomplish. So this is the piece of the Constitution that we are looking at when we're talking about birthright citizenship, okay? 14th Amendment, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Okay, now a lot of people wonder what naturalized means in that context. Usually when you see the word naturalized, you think that means someone who is buying more expensive deodorant, but it doesn't work. That's actually not what naturalized means. Naturalized means basically going through the legal process to become a citizen. And in the United States, this 14th Amendment has been interpreted by lower courts and Congress that it basically means anyone born on U.S. soil is a citizen. Okay, that's how that's been interpreted. There's been one Supreme Court case that was really on point, and I think the facts are distinguishable, and I think it actually is a narrower holding than the way that the courts after that have been looking at it. So we're going to look at that, but I'm going to be honest right now that the courts and the government in the United States for the last 100 years have just assumed this means, hey, if somebody's born here, boom, you're a citizen. That's all it requires. That's how it has been interpreted. But before we get into any of the cases, just look at the language of the 14th Amendment. If all that means is that if you are born here, you're now a citizen, then what does "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof" even add? Because you could take that out and it would say all persons born in the U.S. are citizens of the U.S. Okay, now you add in this phrase "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof," and basically most people are trying to say, well, that really doesn't mean anything. What? Why would you do that? That's like putting a sign on a life jacket that says "don't drown." There's no reason for that. And what we need to figure out is, what were they trying to add by adding that phrase to the 14th Amendment? Don't listen to all your lefty friends who are just saying nothing. It just means if you're born here, boom, you're a citizen. They're idiots, okay? Just listen to me, we'll walk through this together. Let's first look at the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Now this is important because it was kind of a predecessor to the 14th Amendment. So we can see what Congress was trying to accomplish in the predecessor to the 14th Amendment in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. In this act, it defines citizenship as applying to those not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed. It explicitly excluded individuals who maintained allegiance to another sovereign entity. And the first statutory recognition of citizenship principles later included in the 14th Amendment. So I think this is really important because you can see that the drafters at the time that this was written, when they were writing the predecessor, they were already looking at excluding individuals who had an allegiance to another sovereign entity. What does that mean? Well, I think you know what that would mean. That means they're citizens of another country, right? That seems pretty obvious. That's probably what it meant. Now, why did Congress enact the Civil Rights Act of 1866? Well, they were trying to address the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which was a terrible decision from the Supreme Court, where they decided that descendants from slaves were not citizens of the United States. So that was a holding of the Supreme Court, and Congress was trying to fix that through the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Now, the reason why Congress enacted this Civil Rights Act of 1866 is they were trying to fix the Supreme Court decision of Dred Scott. In Dred Scott, the U.S. Supreme Court said that descendants of slaves were not citizens of the United States. Okay, so that's a great example of where the Supreme Court made a decision and they were wrong. So anyway, after that decision, Congress tried to fix that through the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So back then, racism meant you couldn't be a citizen based on the color of your skin. And today, racism is you ordered a pumpkin spice latte in February. Look at the kind of progress we're making. Now, what none of the people on the left want to talk about is that an earlier version of the 14th Amendment. So again, that Civil Rights Act, that was a predecessor to this 14th Amendment, but they wanted to try to put that into a constitutional amendment form, which is the 14th Amendment. But in an earlier version of the 14th Amendment, they didn't include that language and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So an earlier version of the 14th Amendment basically just said all persons born in the U.S. are citizens of the U.S., okay? So if they looked at that and said, that's perfect, that's exactly what we meant. So let's keep it that way, right? No, they're saying, no, that's perfect. We just want anyone born here to be citizens. But why don't we add a new phrase in the middle, just for no reason whatsoever? That makes no sense, right? You're going to agree with me on that one. Clearly, that makes no sense. The earlier version did not have this and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, to find out what people really intended to do when they wrote the 14th Amendment, we need to look at some of the language of what they were talking about while they were writing the 14th Amendment. Okay, so let's look at this Senator Jacob Howard on jurisdiction. He was one of the authors of the 14th Amendment. He stated that jurisdiction meant a full and complete jurisdiction requiring complete allegiance to the United States. And this is a quote from him. I got this from a law review article. That's right, I looked up law review articles for this. Huh? So this is a quote. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons. So did you see that part when he said this will not, of course, include persons born in the U.S. who are foreigners, aliens? Did you see that part? Okay, good, because that's... this contrasts with merely being subject to the United States laws while on the U.S. soil. Because right now, people who are trying to argue for a very broad interpretation of the birthright citizenship, where they're arguing that anybody born here should basically just get citizenship without regard to their status, that's very different than this quote from Senator Howard, where he says, this will not, of course, include persons born in the U.S. who are foreigners or aliens. So from this quote, you can clearly see that Senator Howard didn't intend to include foreigners or aliens in those people who had automatic citizenship for any of their babies born, right? Clearly, he didn't mean to include foreigners or aliens. But modern legal scholars now say, okay, but did he mean to include foreigners or aliens? Can you read? Because he clearly says no. Then we have the final version of the 14th Amendment where they do have this language and subject to the jurisdiction thereof in it, okay? So, I mean, clearly the drafters were just trying to hit their word count. They weren't trying to exclude anyone and specifically the foreigners or aliens that we just talked about, right? No, it was, I'm sure they got paid by the word, and he was just like, I need this to be longer. One case I want to look at, now this is a Supreme Court case, so you can start feeling a little bit more lawyerly now. We're going to be looking at some case law, but this is Elk versus Wilkins from 1884, and I'm assuming that elk is a person, it's not an animal. Just saying that because we've got some weird folks out there who might think somebody identified as an animal. They weren't doing that back then, it's a person. So in Elk versus Wilkins, 1884, the Supreme Court ruled that Native Americans born under tribal jurisdiction were not U.S. citizens, and that citizenship required full political allegiance, not just birth in a U.S. territory, and it reinforced that subject to jurisdiction in that 14th Amendment required more than mere presence. Okay, so let's just do a quick review. So if Native Americans are born here, they do not get automatic citizenship, but everyone else does. Does that make any sense? These are Native Americans. Like, they were here first. Would you not think that maybe if anybody got automatic U.S. citizenship, it would be the people that we kicked out? I mean, does it not, like, why would you, the people that were here first, why would you have a case that said, no, you guys, you're born here. No, you don't get it. You don't get it. But, you know, if we have a gang member from wherever, Guatemala, come in or wherever, yeah, and they have kids, they definitely will be citizens. But not Native Americans subject to that. This is such a good corollary to, you know, okay, if you got Native Americans born under tribal jurisdiction, they're not getting citizenship. How is that not better than somebody subject to the citizenship and jurisdiction of a foreign country coming in here and having a baby? To me, it just seems like, look, if we're not giving it to Native Americans who are born here, are you insane? Why would we be giving it to random people who come here for the, you know, break across the border, sneak in for the first time, and like, yeah, but you guys, you get it. Now we get to the case of the United States versus Wong Kim Ark. So this is the case that everybody points to, especially on the left, and they say, this is the one that settles it, period, right? You know, just like Roe v. Wade settled it until it didn't. But I feel like this case should be construed more narrowly than many people are looking at it right now. So let's just look at some of the facts of this case. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco in 1873 to Chinese parents who were legally domiciled in the United States. Legally domiciled in the United States. That's very important. Remember that part. His parents were barred from naturalization due to the Chinese Exclusion Act. There we go. That seems kind of rough, right? So again, that's another example of racism back then was you can't naturalize because you're Chinese. Racism today is you like math too much. Anyway, getting back to the case. So in 1895, after a trip to China, Wong was denied re-entry by U.S. officials who claimed that he was not a citizen. Wong filed a lawsuit asserting his U.S. citizenship under the 14th Amendment. So to me, this case has a very narrow issue. It's whether a U.S.-born child of Chinese subjects who are lawfully present and permanently domiciled in the United States was a citizen from birth. That's really what the issue was. That's what the question that went up to the Supreme Court was. The Supreme Court ruled that children of legally present, permanently domiciled immigrants were citizens. I feel like that is what the holding really is. It did not rule on the status of children born to illegal or temporary immigrants because those weren't the facts of the case. Okay? So this case is about people who were here legally. So naturally, it should stand for the fact that anyone who is here illegally should get citizenship. That makes sense, right? It doesn't. That was a trick question. It doesn't. So I think Wong Kim Ark really should give us a much more limited just so Lee interpretation. I just had to use Latin once. Jus soli means birthright citizenship. But I have to throw in Latin just because sometimes saying birthright citizenship isn't pretentious enough. No, I don't. Is anyone else confused on why Latin America, they don't speak Latin? I still haven't figured that out. Anyway, when you're reading about this birthright citizenship, you might see that term, jus soli. That's the Latin for birthright citizenship. And I didn't know it. I had to look it up because I didn't really learn Latin. But I did go to law school. I just zoned out whenever they started, let's learn Latin. So I feel like the ruling in Wong Kim Ark was specific to a lawfully present permanent residence. I do not think it affirmed universal birthright citizenship for all foreign nationals' children, but I will admit right now, lower courts have applied it very broadly to cover illegal aliens. So lower courts, since that decision by the Supreme Court, have interpreted that way. Okay, that if people are here illegally and they have a baby, congrats, the baby's a U.S. citizen. They have interpreted that very broadly. I think wrongly, though. My position is that I think their interpretation is wrong, and they're interpreting it much more broadly than it really was. And I think the idea that the United States follows an absolute birthright citizenship, I think that remains debatable because the facts of that Wong Kim Ark case, they were here legally. And so I feel like that holding should be, it's applied to that kind of factual situation. And like I said, courts have been interpreting it too broadly. That's debatable, but I feel like that's where the crack is, where I feel like President Trump might be right on how this should have been interpreted under the Constitution as written by those people who wrote the Constitution. I thought I should at least mention this other case, Plyler v. Doe, mainly because I see people throw it around and I think they are misapplying it. But in this case, it was an 82 case. The Supreme Court ruled that undocumented children had a right to public education. But the case did not address or affirm birthright citizenship. So I think this is being misinterpreted by some as affirming automatic citizenship for children of illegal immigrants. That's not what this case was about. All it was about undocumented children having a right to public education. So if somebody tries to use this case as saying, it should be absolute birthright citizenship, I think what their argument is that, hey, my client was in algebra class, therefore he's a U.S. citizen. But it sounds kind of dumb when you say it like that, doesn't it? And one more case I wanted to mention, INS v. Rios Pineda, or Pineda, I'm not sure, from 1985. This is a case where Mexican nationals were in the U.S. illegally. They were fighting deportation. They argued that their U.S.-born child should allow them to stay. It focused on deportation discretion rather than birthright citizenship, the case did. And it did not clarify whether children of illegal immigrants were automatically U.S. citizens. And I think that this INS case shows that courts have not explicitly extended Wong Kim Ark to illegal immigrants' children. That was basically what they were arguing there, and I don't feel like that was any kind of an extension to the Wong Kim Ark case. And just a little, tidbit about this case. They were arguing for 10 years in court about this. So these parents were here illegally, fighting in court for 10 years about whether they could be deported or not. Is that not crazy? That's efficiency at its finest. Can you imagine robbing a bank and they catch you and they let you stay in the bank and in the vault for 10 years while they argue about whether it was okay for you to rob the bank or not? I think that's kind of like what happened here. I just wanted to summarize some arguments on why I think President Trump could be right about his interpretation of birthright citizenship. That the 14th Amendment was passed to grant citizenship to freed slaves, but they used overly broad language. They had a specific purpose and something they were trying to fix from that Dred Scott decision. And they were dumb and used really broad language. And basically that's part of the problem, is the language was very broad. I think citizenship requires full jurisdiction, not just birth on U.S. soil. I think if you look at the legislative history, you look at the discussions at the time from the people who were writing the 14th Amendment, it should require full allegiance, and it should not grant citizenship to those with foreign allegiances, meaning they're citizens of another country and they break the law to get in, run across the border, sneak in some way. They clearly have no allegiance to the United States whatsoever. I also think the Supreme Court precedent in Wong Kim Ark did not explicitly extend citizenship to children of illegal immigrants. It only applies to children of legally present, permanently domiciled immigrants. So I feel like that kind of encapsulates what some arguments for President Trump's position on the 14th Amendment. So hopefully the U.S. Supreme Court will end up taking up this case. We did have the district court decision that I started with, where they put it on hold. That should go to an appeals court. I'm sure they'll affirm it. And then hopefully the Supreme Court will take it. And I feel like the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, kind of shorthand for us, YouTube people. SCOTUS can distinguish Wong Kim Ark on the facts without overturning it. So I feel like they can keep it as good law, and they can just distinguish that from the facts. They can clarify that the holding of Wong Kim Ark only applies to children of legally present, permanently domiciled immigrants. Those were the facts of the case, and I feel like it would be very easy for them to just distinguish a case where you have people who are here illegally versus they're legally here and permanently domiciled. It's very different. The Supreme Court could refine subject to jurisdiction, that language from the 14th Amendment. They could refine that to the proper definition based on history, meaning they must be legally present, permanently domiciled immigrants. Now, this doctrine of stare decisis, which is basically relying on precedent, that's going to make it harder for the Supreme Court to want to actually do that, because a lot of people have been relying on this very broad interpretation of Wong Kim Ark for a long time. So it will make it more difficult for them to make that interpretation, but it's not going to be impossible. And I don't know. Do I think the Supreme Court will take it? I don't know. I mean, I hope they do. I hope they do, and I hope that they refine this case, because I feel like we're having some terrible results. If you just look at what's been happening in the country, that crazy, overly broad interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which gives us birthright citizenship, is too much. But I feel like they could stay within the bounds of what was actually intended in the Constitution if they wanted to. But I don't know. If I had to guess, I really don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I just don't know if Roberts is going to want to take this case. So I think it would be great if they did, but basically, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Was that helpful? I'm sure that last part was not at all helpful, but hopefully all the rest of the stuff at least was fun to walk through. All right. Okay. Hey, thank you for watching, and thank you for also watching my headlines. All right. We'll see you later. Bye.